It's time for some hostile therapy. All right, welcome to another episode of Hostile Therapy with your host, Big Red, and returning again, my co-host, Aisha of Aisha Chronicles.
Hey.
And we got a guest with us today, is Mr. Tim Kellis, who is the author of Equality, the Quest for a Happy Marriage. Now, I looked at some of your books, not some of your books, some of your videos, and seeing you talk to some of the couples you helped. And the one thing I saw that was of interest of me said you read over 100 books to come to the conclusion of how to fix a broken marriage. And what I imagined was you were in a basement and you were reading all these books and they were failing to come up with a good answer. You starved yourself, your ribs were showing, your beard grew down to your knees, and then you're like, aha, I got the answer. And you ran outside and said, hear ye, I know the answer to fix a broken marriage. Is that what happened?
And then I moved to Costa Rica for 9 months where I wrote the book. So exactly, similar, yeah, kind of what you're talking about, but it took me about 2 years to research and write the whole book.
Wow, okay. So can you give us a premise of what the book is about?
Well, the point of the book and what I do basically that's never been done before is I deal with marriages mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, that's never happened before. And at the end of the day, my objective is to eliminate arguments from marriages. Conflict resolution is what is key. Look at Aisha's face. Exactly. She's taking a drink of her wine. Exactly. That's the point. This is new for everybody. That's your reaction, Aisha. This is new for everybody. How do you solve the marriage problem unless you solve the marriage problems?
Mm-hmm.
So as it turns out, conflict resolution is the key to understanding how to make a relationship successful or not. In fact, here's one of my big reveals.
Okay.
Couples that are successful because they get along. Couples that are not successful because they don't get along.
That doesn't sound that hard to understand.
None of this is complicated. It's all new, hence Aisha's response. It's all new.
No, that's not actually. This is all common sense, and I'm just waiting for you to say, well, you just walk away and leave it alone, which doesn't happen, but go on.
You have to solve every problem in your marriage, or else you develop what are called psychic lesions, which are holes in mental development. So, for example, let's just say intimacy is a problem. Mm-hmm. And anytime one of you brings up intimacy, the other one who's insecure about it gets angry and causes a fight. Well, guess what quits happening? You quit bringing up intimacy, and then you no longer develop that part of your relationship. In fact, one of the greatest things I do is I teach couples how to be as comfortable talking about intimacy as they are talking about the grocery list. Because the reality is what?
Most people don't just stop talking about it. They just stop talking about it to their partner, and unfortunately, they start talking about it to someone else, which causes infidelity.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can't talk to your partner about your problems, you're in a bad space. Right. Exactly, and that's the point. And then we get into communication breaking down, and then we get in because there's two parts of the book. One of them is communication, and the other is conflict resolution. In the communication aspect, and before I say this, let me preface this by saying, in 1970, less than 1% of all law and medical degrees went to women. By 1990, that number was over half. So women are just as educated as men. But one of the things that an engineer is taught to do is they're taught to look at what has changed to cause a problem. Before the 60s, our divorce rate was single digits. Mm-hmm. And so what happened in the 60s, which caused our divorce rate to skyrocket? And I mean this positive when you understand my message, but the education of women, because for the first time in the history of a civilization, number one, women are educated. Number two, they were able to go out and financially support themselves. Right. So they were no longer vulnerable to their man. Because the reality is until the 60s, open up one of the first pages of the Bible. What does it say? The wife will obey the husband. It's called patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Our marriages up until the 60s were based on the man being in charge. Okay, well, not only is that no longer valid, but when you understand, because the other thing that I ultimately do is I neutralize the power drive or the control drive in a marriage. Because if you were to canvass unsuccessful marriages, you would find out maybe not 100%, but pretty close to 100% of problems in a marriage are caused by one or both trying to control the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say I've solved the problem, Nick, you read it, the very first word in the title of my book is equality. We are trying to figure out how to create marriages based on equality. And what's great on the concept of equality is when a marriage is based on equality, there's no temptation for abuse or control.
Mm-hmm.
Very profound to understand the psychological freedom that both in a marriage get when nobody's in charge. There's a psychological imprisonment when you would understand pretty simply when one's being controlled. But when you study it from a mental perspective, you also understand that the person doing the controlling is also psychologically imprisoning themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are the ones that have to control it. In fact, it's a song from, it's a line from a song. It's the lead singer of Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder, and the line of the song basically goes, I built a tower to climb above, and when I came down to be set free, she let me in again. And what he's saying in the line is when he tried to control the marriage by thinking he was better than her, he imprisoned himself. But when he came down from that pedestal, mm-hmm. and he was able to look at his wife eye to eye as equals, he basically set himself free, and she brought him back in again. Okay. So again, when you understand how you're supposed to approach marriages mentally, because is anybody who's ever been in a real relationship realizes is relationships and marriages are mental experiences. They're not physical. You're not there just to have sex. You're there to have a mental experience and a mental relationship with your partner.
Yeah. Fortunately, it seems like a mental war. I would think in a lot of marriages and relationships too. The one thing I also looked at that you were talking about, which I think comes back to the equality issue here, is you talked about the differences between men and women and be able to accept what their strengths are, and them and women being able to accept what our strengths are. Men dealing with things more with logic and women dealing with things more with emotion. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
In fact, that's where I was going when I was describing the change in the 60s. It is a fact, and again, I have to preface this because I can get people could think I'm being negative or whatever. Let me also say that both logic and feelings are both just as important in a mental experience. You know, when I eat ice cream, I'm not just logically eating the ice cream, but I'm enjoying the chocolate flavor. Feelings and logic are both equally important. But it is a fact that before the education of women, men were solely responsible for the thinking aspect of the relationship through controlling the finances, and women were completely responsible for the emotional aspect of the relationship by bearing and raising the children and taking care of the house. So when I say equality, what I basically mean is we are learning how to do the other one. Again, where men are also emotional in a relationship. And again, I'm not saying this to be negative, because again, women are just as educated as men, but when it comes to the relationship, where women also participate in the logical aspect of the relationship. So both are basically able to participate in both sides of the psyche. In fact, one of my favorite quotes to kind of summarize this, have either of you ever heard of Carl Jung?
Carl Jung, yes.
Aisha, you say you haven't? So Carl Jung was 19 years younger than Freud. Mm-hmm. Freud looked up to Jung so much that he not only considered him his heir apparent, but also his son. And as we all know, Freud's theory is that our motivations are sexual based, which is not true, but that's what Freud said. Mm-hmm. And the underlying biology conclusion, which is still the foundation of the psychology industry today. And let's just say this Jung disagreed with Freud on the sexuality theory. And in 1912, they had their famous breakup, where Jung went much further than Freud did in discovering how and realizing how the mind works. In fact, one of my objectives is to ultimately replace Freud with Jung. And there's a bunch of very profound and poignant concepts that Jung discovered. But one of my favorite is when he discusses the mental relationship between a man and woman when it's not going well. It shows up in the irrationality of a man's feeling and a woman's thinking. Because when relationships are not working, we shut down that side of our psyche that we're less comfortable with. So in the man, we shut down our emotional side. In a woman, we shut down our logical side. So let me give you a simple example, Nick, to your question.
Okay.
Where are the kids going to school? If you were to ask a couple where the kids are going to school, think about how the man would, in general, address it. The finances. How much does it cost? And what would the woman address, generically speaking? The nurturing environment of the school.
Right.
And it's important to keep in mind that those are two different conversations, and both are equally important.
Right.
Okay? In fact, one of the biggest things I teach when it comes to communication, and when you understand this one concept, it will change your relationship forever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite simply understanding your partner's perspective. And in fact, the way I elaborate on this is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When most people read that line, they see the pursuit of happiness. But what I elaborate on is life and liberty. Life is a moral concept. Morality is taught to us from the church. When it comes to relationships, morality is manifested as empathy, and empathy is understanding your partner's feelings. Liberty is a political concept. Liberty is equality. Equality, when it comes to relationships, is respect, and that's understanding your partner's thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you guys ever read To Kill a Mockingbird as a kid, okay, there's one, you never read it, Nick?
A long time ago.
Long time ago, exactly. But there's one line in that book that changed my life. And the line in that book is, if you want to understand a man, you have to walk in his shoes. And I live by that every day. But let me give you the real life example that really kind of simplifies the conversation. I no longer get mad at slow drivers because I simply now, look at Aisha, because I have another drink of wine, because I simply now realize that other drivers are also going somewhere. And the point I'm making, think about that and extrapolate that in a relationship. If you were to simply understand your partner's perspective,
right.
Think about how much that alleviates the anxiety when you take your partner's perspective into consideration. And so the point, Nick, to your question is, when relationships are not working, the communication that breaks down is, number one, you no longer understand your partner's perspective, but number two, men get less emotional, women get less logical. Now, I'm not gay, not that there's anything wrong with that, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said.
Okay.
But one of the things that I've been doing personally is I've been expanding my emotional side of my personality, of my mental perspective.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with a guy being emotional. In fact, it's unfortunate that there's no clear, strong message out there. Obviously, the logic for women is, because women are now educated,
right.
But it's seen as a weakness for a man to have feelings.
Exactly.
Look, Aisha. And there's
It's
not
sad.
a damn thing wrong, excuse my French, but there's not a damn thing wrong with a guy being emotional. In fact, guys are emotional at the beginning, right?
Right.
When you date, you buy flowers, you compliment her,
Yeah.
you open up your emotional side to your woman. But it's when the relationship is heading in the wrong direction that those two break down.
Yeah. I always say this. I think guys take things more to heart than women. Like, we can have one experience that will affect us for the rest of our lives, and women are given the opportunity to be hurt and recover and be hurt and recover. If a guy has his heart broken as a teenager, he becomes a pimp, pretty much. You know, he forever he just wants to just be with a woman, but he doesn't want to open himself up to a woman for marriage, or completely like his woman is doing on the opposite end. I don't know if that's all just nurture or nature, But yeah, I think that is a issue for a lot of relationships is guys are not or don't feel free enough to open themselves up.
And you have to ask yourself the question
I'm
of
gonna
why. Why is that the case? It's because we're not as developed emotionally as women are.
Mm-hmm.
And so women are a lot better at dealing with the spectrum of emotions that are a part of life. Men are not,
Right.
because men are not trained. In fact, what you realize when you have a successful relationship, that's what's happening. When I talk about a partnership,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and this is the other aspect that you may be referring to, Nick. In fact, the way I demonstrate this in the book is the two co-founders of Microsoft, Bill Gates and Paul Allen. If you've ever seen a picture of Paul Allen has this full, unkept beard. In fact, Paul Allen, not that money is supposed to buy you happiness, but Paul Allen died recently. He owned the Seattle Seahawks football team and the Seattle Supersonics basketball team.
Yes.
Never once got married. And the point I'm making with that analogy is Paul Allen's skills was not in sales. That was Bill Gates' responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Allen was the engineer. And the point obviously is Bill Gates had his skill set. Paul Allen had his skill set. Bill Gates was the sales guy. Paul Allen was the engineer. Think about that when it comes to relationship. The man has his skill set and the woman has her skill set. And what's happening when a couple is growing together is one is willing and open to learn from the other. It's one of the more interesting aspects of unsuccessful relationships when one is not willing to learn from their partner. The difference between somebody who is ignorant and somebody who is intelligent is one of them knows they're ignorant. Think about that for a second. It's the person that thinks they know everything that's the ignorant one in the room. And you guys have been in relationships yourself where the other one knows everything and they won't listen to your side.
All right.
So can I ask this? Do you think that has a lot to do with your point earlier when you were saying morals, how females are raised more on the more of the biblical aspect? With that being said, we are raised to forgive. Therefore, we take these punches over and over again in hopes for a better outcome. Men are raised in the biblical aspect, as you said, to be leaders, to be strong. Leaders are not weak. They're not built to show emotion, and that is not being the leader of your household. When ultimately, if you want to actually use the Bible properly, a female is your helpmate, which means you're there to help each other, not to tear each other down. You cannot have a kingdom that is divided within and then think you're going to rule your kingdom. It does not work that way. Most men don't see that. They see they're stepping up as you're trying to be king. And she's more of a, I'm just trying to help you, vice versa. And that's where a lot of that disconnect comes from. Again, like you said, the morals to me, especially being raised in a Christian home, and I was married. I'm not sure if he had told you I've been married for 14 years. I've been through this. So a lot of the disconnect was the communication, the fight for ultimately control when there was no fight in the beginning. It was when you're down, I pick you up, and it's supposed to be vice versa. But that happens on both ends for women too. I mean, women tend to forget when a man comes home and he's worked a 12-hour shift, he doesn't want to build a shed. But women are working now too. So when we come home and we've had an 8-hour shift, we may not be as physical, but our mind has been just everywhere. Now we have to focus on the kids, and now we got to focus on you. It goes both ways. But again, we still suck it up, and we love and we forgive, and we go from there. And men have to have this, I'm the man, and they suck it up and they hurt. And the saddest part about them hurting is they can't even talk to the one person who's supposed to be there for them, their true best friend, their confidant. They can't even do that because they feel if they do that, they're going to be weak. So what happened to that disconnect in the world where we can't look up at our spouse or our mate and say, I'm still here for you despite of whatever you tell me?
Well, that's where the confusion has been that the man was the one in charge. Like you said, the Bible is patriarchy based. The man is in charge. Well, that doesn't work any longer.
Right.
So they're both fighting for control. That's the confusing aspect that has changed in the structure of the marriage. Before the 60s, it was defined. The church supported that. Everybody knew that the man was the default decision maker in the marriage. What we have not been trained now, which is my mission, is to create a marriage based on a partnership.
Right.
To where nobody's in charge, to where
You're
every
together.
decision has to be agreed to by both partners.
Right.
And what that does, though, Aisha, it's really important to understand that what you do when you create a marriage based on a partnership is you take on the world instead of each other.
That part.
Exactly. And when your
And
focus is
that
on
is
the
verbatim one of the things I screamed during the Will Smith Jada Pinkett situation, where everyone was like, oh, this is not about their marriage and what happened transpired after. It's just the fact they healed, they mended each other, and they realize they're in this together, and it's them against the world. It's that's all that mattered. And so for people that look down on them, they don't get that yet. They don't get that yet. But I'm there with you, Tim. I'm there with you.
well, that's the point. That's the point. One of the coolest things that happens, and Nick, you probably saw that in those testimonials that you watched of the couples that I've worked with, is when people eliminate arguments from their marriage, it's a peaceful place. It's a beautiful place. The reality is when you meet and fall in love with somebody, you create this huge emotional bond towards each other. Just think about this from the perspective that two people, independent of each other, both decide that they want to spend the rest of their lives together. That is an unbelievable realization. And so what happens is they create this huge emotional bond towards each other. And one of the things that you realize is the mind is never stagnant. The mind is either growing or shrinking, depending on what you focus on. And so you have a decision after you fall in love with somebody on whether you want to grow that or shrink that. When you introduce arguments into a marriage, you introduce an incredibly debilitating psychological component to the relationship that actually is shrinking the bond that the two have created towards each other. I call it death by 1,000 swords. When somebody says, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, what they're basically saying is the feelings are gone. But we live together, we have kids together, we have a checking account together, we have a logical relationship, but our emotional bond is completely evaporated. And so when people learn how to create a successful marriage based on partnership, then they have the decision or the free will, which is what God's trying to get us to understand. We have the free will of deciding whether we want to grow the bond between the two of us or shrink the bond between the two of us. Because then you get into conflict resolution, because the reality is conflicts are inevitable.
Right.
Okay? In no way am I ever saying there aren't going to be conflicts in a relationship. That is an unbelievable, naive comment, and I will never make that. But what I teach is the difference between disagreements and arguments. Disagreements are logical and forward-looking. Arguments are emotional and backwards-looking.
Right.
In fact, one of my favorite quotes, when you argue and you give up the use of reason, that's like administering medicine to the dead. Once you go past that imaginary line of logical to emotional, you're at a point of no return. You know, Aisha, you came home late for work. How dare you do that? Well, because I did this. Well, you should have called me. I know, but I'm sorry. You are such a jerk. Once I cross that logical conversation of why you came home late for work and your side and my side to now emotional, you're a jerk. You just don't think about me. You don't care about me. Once we cross that line of logical to emotional, there's no solution. Now I've crossed the line. Aisha, how do you and I solve this problem? You coming home late for work and I'm calling you a jerk. There is no solution to that conversation. And then you go off in your corner, I go off in my corner. You know, we don't talk to each other until finally enough time has calmed us down a bit and maybe we forget about it. But that conflict has psychological damages to it. If we don't figure out what are we going to do about you coming home late for work, how do we solve that problem? If not, you come home late for work next time, I'm going to do the same exact thing. Aisha, you came home late, I'm sorry, but you're such a jerk. And then it elevates. And that's when the negative bond between us is growing.
Then he come home eating later, or may not come
and
home.
Then she doesn't care anymore.
Right.
One of the most interesting.
You know.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I say that's where the scenarios get made up in your head. And that's how that starts. You know, somebody's a made up scenario in the head. Well, where are you at? You're probably out doing such. And you're like, you haven't even taken the moment to realize why. And then before you know, you're blabbering at each other. And like you said, it's gone. And that's what causes that trickle down emotion that you were talking about, Nick, how men are scared. They'll harden their heart. At that point, you become damaged goods.
Right.
At that point, it's you keep harvesting, you never let it go.
And one of the most interesting aspects of an argument, and this is more true in the beginning than at the end, which blows the entire notion of an argument out of the water.
What's that?
Is that the person who was found to do something wrong thought about it ahead of time. Aisha, did you come home late for work today to upset me, or did you come home late for work because you came home late for work? Were you trying to upset me on purpose? Of course not.
Right.
You're not thinking ahead of time, not at the beginning. Boy, I'm going to show Tim. Watch this. I told him I'd be home at 5. I'm just going to show up at 6 and see how much I can. No, nobody thinks that way.
Right. Well, most people.
Well, no, when the relationship breaks down, then I don't care any longer. And then she doesn't care any longer.
Okay.
She's like, screw him anyhow. He's going to get mad at me. What difference does it make what time you know? But I'm talking at the beginning, before the relationship has taken that path where it goes in the wrong direction. Nobody does that. We are moral people. It's when we get into these conflicts that are unresolvable. And let me break that down for you guys too, because you guys will enjoy this part of the conversation as well. What I basically do with couples is I break arguments down to their component parts. Mm-hmm. When you understand the dynamics of an argument, you realize that there's a process that takes place, which ultimately leads to an argument. I call it the hierarchy of the argument. And insecurity leads to a prejudice, which leads to being judgmental, which leads to being angry. As it turns out, our mental problems are not biologically based, counter to what the entire psychology industry is trying to convince us. Mm-hmm. Our mental issues turned out to be prejudices. Your parents got divorced, for example. You now have what I call a relationship prejudice based on, and in fact, the biggest key to a relationship is your relationship with your parents, because that's where you first learn about love. And if your parents had some sort of negative lesson that they taught you about love, you bring that into your relationship as a fear. Mm-hmm. So your parents got divorced, for example. Now you introduce that into your relationship. And unfortunately, the reality is if you fear something happening in your relationship, it will happen. If you build it, it will come. If you're so jealous, for example, of your partner cheating on you, that anytime there's anything out of the ordinary that you can somehow even lightly construe as some potential risk to your relationship, and you get jealous at your partner, guess what your partner eventually does? Screw it, I'm cheating on him.
Right.
If you fear something, it will happen in your relationship. So if your parents got divorced, and you are afraid of your relationship ending, guess what's going to happen? Because your fears, your subjective fears, which create your subjective prejudices, are going to lead to you being judgmental and then angry in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. You manifested your own fear.
I'm sorry?
You manifested your own fear.
Exactly. That's the point. That's the way it works.
Yep.
And what I figured out, and this took me years to figure out, and when I finally figured out what I'm about to explain to you, I had to laugh at myself because of its simplicity. But the reality is, and what I just explained to you breaks down to fear, anger. So when you come home late for work, Aisha, and I get mad at you, understand that it's my fear, self-confidence, abandonment, whatever these lessons that I was taught during my upbringing that I'm bringing into the marriage are what's motivating me to get angry. And the unfortunate reality is because of the fight or flight syndrome, when you come home late for work and I get mad at you, you're defending yourself. That's what we are naturally inclined to do. And what I ultimately teach couples, now the premise of what I'm about to explain to you is that you're behaving morally to begin with, that you in fact did get that call at the last minute work and we're not out having drinks with your girlfriend, because if you come home doing something wrong, you don't have a clear conscience to be able to have this conversation with me. But if you come home, because my question that I try to answer that took me years to answer is, if I'm not doing anything wrong and I still get in trouble, how do I address that situation? The way I address it is turn the conversation around. So when Aisha, you come home late for work and I get mad at you, if you could only learn to look at Tim and say, what are you afraid of? And I'm telling you, when I've taught that skill to couples, it stops arguments in their tracks.
I'm sorry to laugh. I just think that needs to be expressed to be said a certain way, because Nick, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that is like the easiest rebuttal on earth. But if said wrong, it will still distort every bit of this conversation you're having. Because, example, Nick, you say, where have you been? What you been doing? Well, what you worried about? You worried about losing me? You cheating? It can easily be done wrong.
No, Aisha, you're missing the point. You're missing the point of the conversation. The only reason why I am able to confidently stand in front of anybody and tell them that I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old.
No, I get that. I'm saying, well, what you just said is reversing that statement. So if you reverse that statement to get the proper response, I think it's just I think it should be injected on how to reverse it, because I've seen it reversed before. And it's been reversed in a way that it can be said negatively, and you're like,
no, it has nothing to do with you. This is what I'm saying. When Nick comes home late for work and you get mad at Nick and Nick looks at you and says, what are you afraid of? It's not about Nick. It's about your upbringing.
No, I get that. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, Nick?
I'm thinking you're talking about how somebody could reverse that answer after hearing that over so many times. Is that what you're trying to say?
Pretty much on how it's like the way he's saying it is like, okay, I'm coming home late and your question, well, where have I been? And the way in my mental, what I'm hearing is, well, babe, what are you worried about?
No, not what are you worried about? What are you afraid of?
Or what are you afraid of? Even if I use that, what are you afraid of?
And my first response is going to be something about you. But then when you ask the question, why? The reason it's my fear. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you. Didn't do anything wrong.
I know that. I don't think you're getting what I'm trying to say, but it's okay. Go ahead.
No, what I'm doing is I'm turning the conversation to be a psychological opportunity for me to grow. Because it has to do with me. We've got to figure out how to turn this conversation to the source of the problem. It's root cause analysis. And the root cause of this has nothing to do with you. It has to do with my upbringing. Something I was taught through my upbringing has got me afraid of something happening in my relationship with you. So what I'm doing is I'm turning the conversation back around to me. It has nothing to do with you. We take the conversation off of you and turn the conversation towards me. And when couples have a relationship where there's a safe zone to be able to bring up issues, then I'm able to bring up, well, my parents did this to me and I was taught this and I'm afraid of this happening. Because it has to do with my upbringing. It has nothing to do with you. In fact, one of my favorite books is There's No One to Blame. Couples are trying to find problems in a relationship where neither of them have anything to do with the problem. It has to do with something in their past.
Would that still work, though, if only one person is using that method, though? I mean,
yeah,
that's my
absolutely.
point.
Okay, I thought that's not what you were saying.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
what I'm
Because
saying,
I get every bit of what you're saying. Please don't think there's any lost logic here. I get every bit of it. It's just I've seen scenarios in different ways, and I'm not saying you haven't worked on them and helped couples. I truly believe that. I've seen and been through different scenarios, and even the whole psychological part. I get that. I am a big firm believer on how things are said. But
no, yeah, I
please
understand.
don't.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is you've got to get the conversation from being defensive, because that's what it is. One's accusing the other, and the other's defending themselves, and then they'll turn around and accuse the one of doing something, and that's how an argument takes place.
Right.
That was my point.
You wouldn't be able to get anywhere the other way is what you're saying now. I'm guessing it also
right.
would take maybe time, maybe for that method to, I don't know if that method would work the first go around. Maybe it would take time for them to understand what you're trying to do.
Well, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the source of the problem.
Right.
That's the psychological objective for couples. They're called shadows in the psychology world. And we all have shadows, and then we also inherit our partner shadows. And the objective for couples to grow together is to be able to expose our shadows. And all I'm saying is when somebody gets angry, a nerve has been struck.
Triggered.
And it's understanding the source of that nerve, which is what we've got to figure out.
Right.
And then we get into the forgiveness part.
Yeah. But that takes time, right?
Of course.
Okay. I would think it'll be also harder for if Aisha were to ask, what do I feel to a guy? He may not be just readily open. Like, what do you mean what I feel? I don't feel nothing. You don't feel nothing but God or something like that. She may get
again
to respond.
And that comes with the tone I say it in, or even my body language, or it also comes with the level we are on communication. So that's why I say it can be flipped in so many different ways. But again, I'm big on how you speak to me. Body language, verbiage. You could tell me I am the ugliest person in the world, but how you say it is how I'm going to interpret it. And then that could either change the whole entire mood where you were the only one angry, or we're both angry now because now you've insulted me. So that's my point. That was my perspective on that.
Yeah, no, I understand. But all I'm saying, Aisha, if you come home late from work and I get mad at you, if the guy gets angry, how do you respond? Aisha, you're such a jerk. You're an idiot. How do you respond to that emotional attack? And all I'm saying is, what are you afraid of, or however you want to say it to be comfortable. But however you're saying it, however you want to approach it, so that we turn the conversation back onto me.
Right. No, I get that. I was just for not for myself, because I have literally lived through that whole scenario. Not for myself, but for those who are watching and have never been through this, and they're trying to learn from this. They need to know there is a means of communication, from body language to verbiage to your tone.
Right.
Every part of that aspect, before you try to change before you try to reverse the situation to help them understand that you're just trying to understand them, you need to reflect with yourself first before you respond. That's a big issue. Like I said, I've been through it. I've had that verbatim question asked me, and I knew it was doing nothing wrong. In the back of my head, since I knew I did nothing wrong, it was nothing to fear. So all I could do was respond properly. But again, it's all about how you communicate.
Well, let me give you the objective, though. Okay, this is what couples are trying to grow to become. A balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. A balanced ego is when you are better than you used to be. And what I mean by that is, when you become mentally developed or mature or growing or whatever, you ultimately get to a point where the only person who defines you is you.
Right.
And you don't need anybody else to give you any self-confidence or understanding of who you are. And when that happens, what other people do doesn't affect you. Now, granted, this is your loved one, this is your partner, and they're going to have an effect on you, but you're less you require less of them in order, because you know the number one rule in having a successful marriage is you have to be happy with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's rule number
That's marriage,
one.
that's friendship, that's in life. That's in life. That's in
Exactly.
friendship, marriage, whatever type of relationship you're in. If you're not happy with yourself, you're ultimately going to take it out on everyone around you, despite of what they do. So I agree. That's what I was saying a minute ago. Like I 1,000% agree, because just like I said, I've been in those shoes, and I know I did nothing wrong. And so because of that, I don't take offense to something when I know I've done my part.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's when you're mentally balanced, when you know you didn't do anything wrong, yet you're still being accused of doing something wrong. If you have an open mind, okay, because Nick, you mentioned earlier, or I think Aisha may have mentioned common sense. Common sense is the foundation of a successful relationship. And what I mean by that is when you take the subjectivity of the individual out of the relationship, it makes problems oh so simple to solve. Problems are a result of the subjectivity of an individual who doesn't understand or see the common sense, clear, objective outcome or outlook or goal of whatever the issue is. You know, if you guys are, you know, living paycheck to paycheck and somebody wants to go play golf every weekend, there's something imbalanced in that thought process where they're not objectively able to realize the impact of their family financially by making this subjective decision, and they're defending themselves when their spouse is saying, we can't afford that. And if you can't objectively look at a problem and solve it with common sense, you can't ever solve a problem. But if you use common sense as the foundation for the problem, they become oh so easy to solve.
When having these discussions, trying to resolve conflict, is this always going to have to be something where both sides are going to have to sacrifice something to come to a resolution? Because I mean, there's always going to be a discussion. We're not always going to agree, but is sacrifice one of the key things to come into a resolution between the two?
Well, the answer to that question is, here's the way a conflict is supposed to be solved. Let me use a simple example. One of you doesn't like cleaning out the dishes and the other one does. Okay. The answer to that is the one that enjoys cleaning out the dishes, clean out the dishes. Mm-hmm. Okay. But there's the issue when both of us don't like the dishwasher. Right. Both of us don't like cleaning out the dishes. And if that's the case, then we both do it together. And so it's a lot less of a pain in the butt because we're working together. So when you're saying sacrifice, when you realize that the objective of solving a problem is for the benefit of the marriage, it's not so much a sacrifice as it is actually improving.
Yeah, sacrifice negative, right?
Yeah, the sacrifice conveys, a negative, you're giving something up.
Right.
Because the reality is if you both come to a conclusion that's in the best interest of both of you, nobody is really sacrificing because it's advancing the relationship. Every time the dishwasher's full, we get into this argument because I don't want to do it and you don't want to do it. We get in this huge fight. And then all of a sudden we realize, wait a minute, let's do it together. Because you hate it, I hate it. So we get together. It takes half the time to get it done because we're working together and the problem is solved. What was the sacrifice was when I had to do the dishes myself and I hated doing the dishes. Mm-hmm. The sacrifice is when one who is trying to control the relationship forces the other to do something that they don't want to do. That's where the concept of sacrifice comes in. I've been in a relationship.
It's not the word sacrifice, it's more the word compromise. We can agree to disagree, but let's come to a conclusion and figure out how we're going to work through this situation. Other than that, we're just bickering.
Exactly. And agree to disagree, unfortunately, doesn't really do that either, because that basically then says we're going to table the conversation and we're never getting anywhere with it.
Well, no. And like I said, agree to disagree, but we come to a conclusion. We finish this. We don't agree. I don't like to wash the dishes. You don't like to mop. I prefer you do. I guess that's not going to work. This is what we're going to do from here. We come to a solution. Other than that, you're just bickering. You're just complaining.
But again, Aisha, if you look at it from my perspective and I look at it from your perspective, just like the slow driver, then we understand each other's perspective and It makes it a lot less painful, a lot less of an issue. Because the reality is you're in a relationship, you guys are supposed to be working towards each other. You know,
Right.
if I hate mopping the floor, but you hate it too, and you work all day and I'm at home watching television all day, why don't I get off my lazy rump and go, you know, mop the floor knowing what it's going to do to benefit you? Why aren't I doing something, realizing what it's going to mean to you, seeing me do that?
'Cause that's why we have kids.
Exactly. I was about to say,
Exactly.
that's exactly why
And then you have kids.
Tim,
And of course, we're just using these as examples, but regardless of what the issue is, from mopping the floor to the dishwasher to where the kids are going to school, or whether one of us is going to, you know, take a job out of state where we have to move. I mean, all these issues are, you know, a partnership is being able to resolve conflicts that were unanticipated.
Right.
None of us saw the virus happen. I saw a statistic the other day that the divorce rate's up by 30% because of the virus. So couples that are in trouble anyhow are having it's worse because now they're together more.
now they have to resolve issues because they got to see.
Or else it gets to be worse. If they're arguing and they're together all day long, they're even arguing even more.
Yeah, people are actually missing going to work for other
Exactly.
reasons.
Yeah. Well, but then there's those couples that are on the right path, where it's you know, the reality is to me the virus is opening our eyes to what's really important, and what's really important is family.
Right.
Your marriage, the person you sleep next to every night, is the most important person in your life. They're supposed to be your number one priority. What?
Me. I sleep next to me. I'm the most important.
Exactly. Well, if you got a guy sleeping next to you, then it's yeah. Well, if you're single, then obviously you're the most important. But when you're in a relationship, and I know you're being funny, but when you're in a relationship, realizing that person you sleep next to every night is supposed to be the priority. And when you prioritize each other and let nothing else interfere with that, there's nothing that can hold the relationship back from being, you know, successful and moving in the right direction.
Tim, let me throw this analogy at you. I want you to tell me if this sounds right. You've been to McDonald's, right? It's this new restaurant that just came out. Aisha, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you talked about the man and his stature in the 1960s. I feel like McDonald's, to men, we were the owners of McDonald's and we just had people working under us. And then as women, you should hear me out. As women got education, got into the workforce, and started sharing dual responsibilities, then when men and women came together, men, I'm not trying to be, you know, sexist or nothing, but men became cashiers, women were the fry cooks. And what happens is, if both of them don't work in tandem, then you have a long line outside and you got people complaining and one feels like they're being done wrong over the other. And then ultimately the restaurant slows down and the ice cream machine is never open like it never really is. You think that's a accurate analogy to go with that? Is that both of them need to work in tandem to make the restaurant, which is marriage, work together? Understanding both of them.
Yeah, exactly. Aisha's trying to hold it back here, but that is the whole notion of a partnership. The fry cook's skill is fry cooking, and I forget what you said the other one does. A cashier, you know, the cashier's skill is cashiering. Mm-hmm. Well, the fry cook doesn't know how to cashier, and the cashier doesn't know how to work the fry cook. So when the cashier's trying to tell the fry cook how to do their job, or the fry cook's trying to tell the cashier how to do their job, when that's not their skill set, that's trying to control. Mm-hmm. Arguing is a control mechanism. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. You know, when you come home late for work and your partners get mad at you, that's them trying to control you because they're uncomfortable with themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, and if I'm trying to, you know, if you're working the cash register and I'm a fry cook and I'm trying to control you working the cash register, think about how ridiculous that analogy is. It doesn't make any sense. Why am I don't have anything to do with you, you know, working the cash register, but I'm trying to control you work the cash register. Because again, your analogy, which is a very valid analogy, is each in the relationship have their own skill sets.
Right. If you're just,
I have my skill set. What?
Okay, I was going to ask. It's just a separate question completely. Do you think it helps when couples, you know, they're starting to learn each other and decide they want to be a couple, etc. The love languages. Do you think it helps when they take that asset test and share with each other what their love languages are? And do you think that's like one of those things that will help them communicate better and how to understand that person?
Well, let me put it to you this way. And of the 100 books that I read, 24 of them are relationship books. Mm-hmm. And men and women are not from the same planet, are from the same planet. Men and women are not from different planets.
Oh, what? No.
Book, exactly. Well, that book has caused more damage to our culture of marriage than anything in the public domain because it's used as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Men and women are from different planets. But what that book did do was it got this genre of relationship help started. But there's very little value into that book. If you actually read that book objectively, there's very little that is actually helpful in solving the problem. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you realize about the psychology industry is they're trained at identifying a problem. You and I don't get along. But they've been given very little education on solving the problem. And what you realize happens with the 5 love languages is it's a very, very small baby step on understanding the other person's perspective. I have this couple that I just got done working with, and when the wife and I first started talking, her and I both joked about, if you tell me the key to a successful relationship is date night, and if you really want to spice things up, we're going to go to a new restaurant, I'm going to puke. This is the whole point about behavioral advice. Mm-hmm. If you and I are still arguing, what good is it for us understanding each other's love language? That book does not solve the problem. It does get people started in a very incremental step on understanding that other person's perspective. But I'll tell you the downside of that book. Do you guys know what quid pro quo means?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, pretty much.
Right.
Well, what it literally means is this for that. It's literally the foundation of the legal system. You are not allowed to enter into any legal contract unless there's an exchange of something. Mm-hmm. What the 5 love languages actually promotes in a negative relationship is quid pro quo. I will buy you something if you sleep with me. And so it doesn't really, that's Aisha, I've seen that happen many times.
No.
I will do this. I will give you your love language if you give me my love language.
No, I asked if that's something that from the like I said, you're starting a relationship. I honestly, from when I was married, I don't foresee myself 5 years into like, this is not working. Let's learn our love languages. And I think it's stupid at that point. You really just don't know each other. I'm saying in the very beginning.
Yeah,
it's a start. Have you noticed it to help or not really? And I asked this because it was asked in another podcast and it was suggested, and I'm like, just communication is the biggest thing to me. But
it absolutely is. But I'll tell you, at the beginning, and that's where even men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's in the ideal world. It's kind of like if you're familiar with the concept of separate but equal.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Separate but equal is idealist. In an ideal world, it's a great thing. We'll keep them separate, but somehow we'll make them equal. Well, then we get separate bathrooms and separate. Exactly, it doesn't work, and we know that. And that's what Men Are From Mars is actually doing. It's promoting. We'll keep them separate and somehow keeping them equal. Well, in a negative relationship, that's what the 5 love languages is trying to do. It's trying to keep us separate. At the beginning, it's great. It's all part of communications.
Right.
But the reality, Aisha, is my love languages should be all 5. And your love languages should be all 5. Mm-hmm. And what you'll find out is whatever language you're not giving me is my love language. And whatever language I'm not giving you is your love language. This notion of giving behavioral advice without discussing why somebody is not behaving that way in the first place is what makes behavioral advice so illogical. But that is what you get from the psychology industry. Because the reality is love is supposed to be unconditional. I'm supposed to give to you all 5 love languages just because I love you. Mm-hmm. And you're supposed to give me all 5 love languages just because you love me. It should be natural. It should be something that's comfortable for the both of us. But again, the reason why the book was written is because we're having this huge divorce culture. And we're trying to figure out how to make it work. That's why addressing marriages mentally is what solves the problem, not with behavioral advice. That's why my approach by addressing marriages mentally is finally the breakthrough that our culture has been looking for. My mission is to lower the divorce rate in this country.
Which
that is what I am out to do. What?
Like before marriages. It should start before marriages.
Of course.
Right? Right. That's why I said that. That's why I said in the dating stage, Not the in-depth stage. At that point, you know, but that's why I say in the dating stage, because you got to start out. Don't just get married because it's fun or it's ideal to do. But you got this relationship that the reason why you're married, because this is you. You can't be without this person. You found your reasoning, but the whole, you know, there's lots and lots of steps prior to that. And I think a lot of, and I say this from social media, I see a lot of people are just in such a hurry to have a husband that they're not realizing that there's so much to being married versus just having a husband. And they don't know themselves, and they're out here ready to get a husband based on this or that or the other, but there's no communication. They're not even learning to be friends. They just someone they like, and well, we get along, and this is our sign, but there's a whole huge disconnect. So I agree with the whole continuing to save marriages, but it's just, I wanted to make sure it was one of those, before you even get to that level of marriage, are we mending relationships before they even decide to sign those legal documents? Because I really think in my personal life, that was one of the biggest disconnects that we had. We were more concerned of making, you know, the idealistic marriage and making our parents happy and morally being right versus, is this right? So
let me explain to you love. Okay. First of all, what you're describing, and you're absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, correct, that you should try and figure this stuff out at the beginning. We wait until the worst time to get help, and couples on the verge of divorce. But at the beginning, you do what I call character research. Where are you from? I went to school here. I have parents, education, this. You do what's called character research. In fact, one of the things that I answer in my book that's never been answered before in 100 years is what causes behavior. The reality is the psychology industry for the last 100 years has been studying animals. We all know Pavlov's dog, or the rat in the maze trying to find the cheese. We all know these stories of the psychology industry studying animals to try and figure out human behavior biologically. But the reality is, and this is a huge breakthrough when you understand this, is that our character traits causes our behavior. Mm-hmm. So for example, I'm a nice guy, and I am a nice guy, but I don't walk around saying to myself, Tim's a nice guy, Tim's a nice guy, but I behave accordingly. I open doors, I talk. My behaviors are a result of my beliefs. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing this character research, this is what you're doing. You're trying to get behind the scenes of who the other person is. In fact, the reality is at the beginning, it's called the false facade in the psychology world. You're putting your best foot forward, as you should, because you're trying to impress them, and they're trying to impress you, right? In fact, ultimately what you do, and this is down the road, is trying to be able to discuss those negative beliefs, those negative characters that are giving you that negative beliefs that's leading you to be angry and judgmental. But let me explain to you love. This is Carl Jung elaborates on this. In a man, it's called the anima. And it is an unconscious drive to meet a woman. And it develops during your childhood and through dating. In fact, when you date somebody and you break up with them, they're called stepping stones. But what you're doing unconsciously is you're developing this vision of a woman. And in the woman, it's called the animus. It's an unconscious drive to meet a man. And the same thing, through upbringing and as dating, your vision, your unconscious drive on meeting a man is developing. Mm-hmm. And what true love is, this is the issue, Aisha, what true love is when those two visions meet. When his anima is matched by her and her animus is matched by him. That's why I like to joke. The reality is you can't drive up to the Walmart and order another one. If you really have met somebody who is your match, who is your unconscious drive for what you're looking for in another person, that's true love. And that's what you're supposed to be developing. And again, the reality is true love is based on these matching visions about who we are as people, what our character is. One of the problems of the psychology industry's focus on behavior is now we're looking at behavior and trying to reverse engineer who the person is. If I were focused, Aisha, for example, on your character, and you come home late from work, and I realize it's because you're ambitious, you want to make a lot of money, you have a career that you love, all of these character traits that are the reasons why I probably fell in love with you in the first place, I will recognize and understand and actually appreciate you coming home late from work. But because of this focus of behavior, and somehow that meaning trying to define who you are based on your behavior, we lose track of the real person. When we lose track on their beliefs and who they are and what their character is, which is who we fell in love with in the first place. And I do blame the psychology industry for a large part of that because of their focus on behavior. But when you're focused on behaviors, you're missing the point. Somebody is not the behavior, because the reality is every one of us is going to screw up. There's only one entity that does not screw up, and that's upstairs. Yeah. You know, I will make mistakes. You guys, we are all going to make mistakes with our behavior. That is a fact of life. And the issue is not the mistake per se, but how we deal with the mistake that differentiates success and failure in the first place.
To add on to your point, I think also to not be afraid to make a mistake too.
Exactly.
Very important.
Exactly. You're not supposed to. If
Right.
You're not afraid of making mistakes, you're not living.
Yeah, that to me, I don't even like the word mistake. It's called lessons learned.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it is. There's no such thing as mistakes.
All right.
You know, they're just opportunities to learn. You're 100% correct.
I thought one of the more powerful things you said in one of your speeches I saw is that we are software wired and not hardware, meaning
Exactly.
we are malleable. We have the ability to change, no matter if you're 30, 40, 50, and 60, as some people think, well, this is just me, accept me for who I am.
It's just the worst response on earth.
Right.
Well, let me tell you guys something, because I am a tad older than both of you.
You never know.
Okay.
I'm 19.
I'm 57.
I'm 64 in physical years.
Yeah.
How
You
about
are not.
my body is 64. It's broken down. You haven't seen my knees, man. They're gone.
Well, okay. Well, regardless, the point I'm making, if you're older, is people who are older know,
Right.
It's not a matter of you might change. You will change.
Yeah.
That is a fact. We are all going to be different 5 years from now than we are today. There's no getting around that fact, both physically and mentally. My biography won't be finished until my obituary, and only God knows my real name.
Right.
That's why it's so important and critical for couples to learn how to grow together, how to manage these life changes together. Kids are growing up and out of the house now. What are you supposed to do now? We know that that's a big problem, because couples aren't getting along, and the kids are now an excuse at least for creating some activity. And when the kids are out of the house, just like the COVID thing, now they're forced to facing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
But
that
it's also
response,
important to understand. It's important to understand that, in fact, the Chinese have a saying that history is a mirror. And if you look at things historically, in fact, I've discovered the original romantic story was King Arthur and Queen Guinevere and the Holy Grail, which was written in the 12th century. And we have had this patriarchy relationships where the men are in charge until the 1960s. And it's such a subject now, it is the problem that we're trying to solve, this notion of romantic relationships. Relationships that were, in the monarchy, they were prearranged, and, our marriages were convenience. My dad is the oldest boy of 15, and I have double-digit family tree all the way back to the early 1800s. Marriages were there as a way to have children, to grow the farm, and all that stuff. This notion of romantic relationships is really relatively new. Because again, we aren't having a romance if one of us is in charge. And when the man was in charge, it was acceptable, and each knew their place, and they accepted their position in the marriage. But true romance cannot happen until nobody's in charge. The ramification, this is the mountaintop. This is the Holy Grail. This is what we've all been trying to figure out for thousands of years. But we can't when one is subordinate to the other, and it's not until the 1960s. And remember, the Bible starts back with Adam and Eve 8,000 years ago. I mean, for thousands of years, the man has been in charge. So this notion that we're trying to figure out how to solve the marriage problem and have a romantic relationship, it's relatively new. And when you realize the rewards of having that marriage, now there have been relationships. I'm not saying that relationships throughout history weren't healthy and successful and meaningful. The fact they were more healthy, more successful, and more meaningful before the 60s because there was not a culture of divorce and people accepted their roles and they got close to one another because of that. But what's changing now is the notion of inequality and where one's in charge. But when we get through this and learn how to get along as a partnership, the rewards for that have not been experienced before because it's finally, for the first time in history, a marriage where nobody's in charge and both get to enjoy the benefit of mental growth. When somebody is subordinate, what that means psychologically is their mental growth is stunted. We know that it was against the law to teach the slaves to read. We know that if you do not educate somebody, they do not learn. They do not realize who they are. And when you're trying to control somebody, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep them from developing. And so this notion of both in a marriage being able to both develop themselves on who they are, that is new. And when you create a marriage based on equality where both get to develop to who they are supposed to be, that is the mountaintop. That is the Holy Grail. That is what we're supposed to figure out. And that's why marriage is the most important aspect of your life.
Tim, with all that being said, I want to ask this question. Can you even move forward with the way you want us to have discussions? Can you even move forward if you haven't dealt with the insecurities that you may have gotten from your parents? If you don't deal with that first.
Well, it's not that you can't move forward. But you are moving forward because at the end of the day, what you said is what you were doing is dealing with insecurities, helping to heal from the past wounds. And that's what the couple are supposed to be helping each other do. If you're not solving them, you can't move forward. I will tell you that.
Okay.
Again, like the intimacy analogy we said at the very beginning, whenever an intimacy comes up, we get into a fight and we eventually quit talking about it. What we're doing is we're building our own prisons. We are imprisoning ourselves mentally. When we've got these issues in our marriage that we cannot talk about. And that shrinks mental development. But said in reverse, when you are learning how to grow together and allowing each other to grow independent, to determine or to become who you are, then the rewards are unbelievable that both people get to grow to who they are supposed to be. Because one of the things I realized, Carl Jung, in his autobiography, discovered himself at 12 years old. He woke up one day and realized before that day it was as if a wall of mist existed. There was not yet an eye. And he woke up one day and discovered himself. We are supposed to be figuring out who we are. Why the hell are you here? What God has you on this planet for a reason. And it's your responsibility to figure that out. And once you figure that out, the mental freedom that you get knowing that your fate has been predetermined by God on what my fate is, the marriage problem. And it's taken me 30 years to figure that out. But I finally figured out my tunnel vision now is this. But I have an engineering degree, MBA, Wall Street, all this background stuff. When I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest. And then I discovered girls, by the way, so that whole career path kind of got derailed.
Yeah, that could all.
Exactly. But when I was 12 years old, I got my vision started. I just didn't realize it. It didn't come together until now. But we are all supposed to be figuring that out. And when you realize that you're supposed to be figuring out your mission on this planet, your partner is supposed to be figuring out his or her mission on this planet, and you two work together to support each other. One of the most interesting aspects of a relationship, in my opinion, is when one spouse does not support the other. Unbelievable. I understand it psychologically and why it happened, but it still blows my mind when one spouse will not support the other spouse. The goal, of course, is for each to support each other. And when you do that, you both get to grow to be who you're supposed to be.
That's good stuff, man. Good stuff.
It's a beautiful thing when it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yisha, did you
That's
have
really what happened in my marriage.
Yisha, did you have any
Say
questions?
what?
Did you have any questions? More questions for him?
Mm-mm. No, I agree. Like, again, we are on the same accord. I agree. And I've lived it, so I know, and I know what to and not to do anymore. But yeah, to a T, even that, even down to the success situation, I had my store, and that was a big issue, and so much to it. So now I learned. I don't regret my marriage. Actually, it's the best thing that ever happened because I have my daughter, and it taught me a lot. And but I also know now I had to learn to love me even out of the marriage, because I loved me prior to, but I was broken down. And now, Nick, I love me. So I've learned to love me. I've had to learn my insecurities, and I had to learn how to accept them, because now I have to teach my daughter how to learn to love herself and her insecurities so she can be a great person to whomever, even if it's just friendships. So I agree, that's some sense. It's cool.
And when you got divorced, you found yourself again. You probably gave up a lot of yourself in the marriage because of control issues. That's what happens when somebody's trying to control. The other one is giving up little pieces of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I got tired of giving me and all of me until I was depleted. And I think the icing on the cake was when my daughter noticed it. And it's bad when your children say that they rather y'all not to be together, because you're better off as co-parents. It shows. So, it's a healing process. I've been through some things. But now we get along. We're great. He knows his role in life now, to teach my daughter what to expect in life from a man. Teach my daughter how to love herself and be happy, and she doesn't need me in. But if she gets into a relationship, these are things that she should expect. Open doors for her. Remind her that she's a flower. And then she, on my end, I remind her that she can live without a man, because that's what we do. But I'm also teaching her how to be a helpmate, because ultimately, helpmates, we're not against each other. We're in this together.
Right.
How old is your daughter?
She's 13.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we also want our kids to have better than we have. So, hopefully we can teach the next generation how to make marriages work, so they don't have to go through the pain, and make them be successful.
Exactly. That's the goal. And I have to say, my mom and dad were great examples, even though, believe it or not, my mom and dad never got married. And my mom did marry someone, and she had married him for 27 years until he died. And my dad respected the marriage. He was actually really active in, still being part of family, etc. But when my stepfather passed, my dad jumped back in as far as being there, supportive for her mentally. They live in different states, thank God, but they're still best friends. And I think together, I said, thank God, because I can't see the two of them together. But they're great examples and one thing my father reminds me all the time is, it doesn't matter if they didn't work out, he has us for it. And so because of that, he's always going to love her. And he's always going to show us what love is. And he's always going to remind my children and my brother's children, even my sister who's not his child, that love is really the ultimate goal. And you can't do that with hostility and hatred and hurt.
No.
So we've had a really big family come to Jesus moment, but it's worth it. It's great.
Coming to Jesus is a good thing.
All right. Tim, we got the last segment coming up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some words, and I just want you to tell me how they make you feel, either through a sentence or paragraph, whatever you want to say on it. Just expound on the word, okay?
Okay.
All right. Your first word is marriage.
Beautiful. Compassionate. The mountaintop. Happy. Awesome.
All good stuff. Okay. Next word is anger.
Judgmental. Frustration. Anxiety. Painful.
Okay. Your next word now is love.
Happiness. That's it. Love is happiness.
All right. Let's see what you say on this one. Your next word, or words, depending on how you look at it. 2020.
Well, quite honestly, and that what's so funny is before March, it was 2020 vision. After March, it's 2020 vision. And to me, again, like I said earlier, 2020, what is really important in life?
Mm-hmm.
It's not how much money we make. It's not how big of a house we have or how big of our car we have. It's our family. It's the things that are not materialistic. That's what 2020 really means to me. Is it really is opening up our eyes to what's important. When we step back and look at this after in hindsight,
Mm-hmm.
and we look back at what we've learned based on this year, it's going to be a huge, huge thing. Because before March, the grind, how much money. I wrote this book in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a third world country, and I lived in a rainforest. And there were people who would be walking from the grocery store in a torrential downpour, smiling. We don't realize how good we have it.
All perspective.
All perspective. You're darn right. We have got it great. I got to eat today twice. I have a roof over my head.
Right.
I have air conditioning. I'm in South Florida. It's a tepid 70 something here. We don't realize how good we have it. I think 2020 is going to open up our eyes to that, to realizing we don't have to be in this rat race that's going to destroy our lives in this notion of getting somewhere where we don't even know what that is. Whenever you guys meet the Joneses, by the way, can you let me know where they live? I'm looking forward to meeting them because I've heard a lot about them.
They're too far ahead of me. I can't keep up with them, but
Yeah, exactly.
I can say it's probably this year has, here's my analogy, is how the Grinch stole Christmas, and he was just pissed off at all the people and what they were doing and stuff when it really wasn't that bad, and he figured that out towards the end, and then his heart grew, 3 sizes bigger after that, and then he appreciated everything that came. It's almost Christmas. It's like we're in November right now, so I can mention the Grinch.
That's not why I laughed. I posted earlier today that the Grinch didn't hate Christmas. He hated the people who make Christmas miserable for him.
Oh, okay.
It's just the irony of you saying that.
We got the same brain
Yeah.
there, huh? Okay. Tim, all right, here's your last word. Your last word is change.
Change is good. Change is good. People have to learn that change is good. Every change that I've ever gone through in my life, during the process wasn't so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got on the other end of that and I look back and realize how much it's helped me, change is awesome. We need to be more and more comfortable with change and realize that it is a fact of life.
Nice. All right, there's again, my guest here was Tim Kellis, who's the author of Equality, The Quest for a Happy Marriage. Where can people go to find your book?
Well, I'm not really selling the book, but what I'm doing is I do free seminars.
Mm-hmm.
And what they want to do is they want to email me, Tim Kellis, TimKellis, at Happy Relationships Relationships is plural. Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. Or they can go to the marriage support group on Facebook. I've got a marriage support group. I've got about 1,700 people on there now. It's been growing though, pretty significantly. And they can join me there as well as a way of getting reaching out to me. But I have a 2-hour free seminar that I will offer anybody that reaches out to me. I do require that both attend.
Right.
Find it interesting when one wants to attend and the other one doesn't. Very hard to solve a marriage problem when one's not interested in learning. Right. So I do make it a requirement that both attend, but I will give a free 2-hour seminar for anybody that reaches out to me. And I'll sit down and go through a very profound conversation about how to make their marriage work. But Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com is the best way of reaching out to me.
Okay. And that's where you had the couples I've seen on the YouTube videos working together?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And give a name to your YouTube page too.
Happy Relationships. It's one word. That's my YouTube page. Yeah, and I've got my TV interviews. The couples I've been working with, their testimonials of what they've learned. In fact, I don't know any other place where you'll find a testimonial where you can find a video where couples talk about what they've learned by getting marriage help. But that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be categorize as many people or cataloging as many couples that I work with that are receptive of me recording a quick testimonial of them, so I can have as many testimonials as possible to show couples, to show people what I'm teaching couples when I work with them.
Good, excellent stuff, man. Well, again, thank you for coming on the show. It's Tim Kellis. Thank you for coming on the show.
Listen, I appreciate it, Nick. I appreciate Aisha. Great conversation, guys. I've been on some of these podcasts that are not so interactive, and when they're interactive, this is the way these podcasts are supposed to go. So you guys, great success on your podcast, and I can't thank you enough for letting me, share, what I'm trying to do. Again, lowering the divorce rate in this country is not an easy thing to do. So I appreciate you guys giving me an opportunity to share on your podcast.
And I appreciate you helping out my love life.
No worries at all.
All right. We will see y'all on the next podcast of Hostile Therapy. Peace.
All right.